So welcome everyone. This is the 28th annual BTLJ-BCLT Symposium. I think that number is important on the 28th. So this is 28 years of partnership between the faculty, the Center for Law Technology, and a student-led journal. And we could talk about, the faculty here at Berkeley. I could go through a list. It would take a day to read all the accomplishments. But sometimes you don't hear enough about the journal that makes all this possible, that handles all of these publications. And this year, I'm the advisor, but I really do nothing that's other than watch in awe what these students do. This year, the journal has attracted 220 students to participate. And these aren't back row participants. These are people putting in the time to edit, select articles, and do the work. But when you think about that, that makes it a huge portion of the culture of the entire law school. These are students looking at all areas of tech, all areas of IP. And they will someday hopefully be on that side as practitioners and academics also. So to the journal, I see a lot of you here. Thank you for all your work in making this happen. The events, Richard Fisk, April Delgado make that happen. But the next few months of hard editing work, I know where that comes from, and thank you for that. So I could spend 20 minutes introducing your keynote. Professor Deirdre Mulligan, if you go through and just bullet point her accomplishments, it'll take at least 20 to get through that. If I explain what they were, it's even longer. But I just picked out a few highlights. Right now, she's a professor at the School of Information, but when you look at her impact across campus, that's what was really always impressive to me. She's a faculty co-director here at BCLT, so she serves as one of our advisors. But then when you look at the rest of it, affiliated faculty for the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, faculty advisor for the AI Policy Hub, faculty advisor for Citrus Policy Lab, and that's just here. Recently, she was in Washington, so not only helping here, but helping nationally. Full title, a wonderful government title. If it's not long, it doesn't count. Principal Deputy U.S. Chief Technology Officer at the White House. And then finally an author of several books, in addition to, of course, the academic papers. So Professor Mulligan, Deirdre, we're glad to have you kick us off for today and for our conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne, for that introduction, and thank you to my colleagues, faculty, staff, and students. I have to say thank you always to the students for all the work you do for these sorts of events, for inviting me to open up this conference at such a consequential time for governance, technology, and the governance of technology. I'm going to use my time this morning, perhaps in a slightly surprising way, but to draw a connection between public funding for research and AI governance and U.S. AI policy more broadly. The importance of strong government AI R&D investment and good progress on AI governance are essential to continued American leadership in AI innovation. I believe that the current administration cares about American leadership. They certainly talk a lot about it. However, their actions are actively destructive of that aim. On the current road, they may destroy American AI leadership and set the field back decades. In this talk, I'll lay out where they should reverse course and where they should double down to continue US leadership in AI. So all of us assembled here today have chosen a career built around innovations in technology and science. Whether your decision to work at the intersection of science, technology, and law is driven by its ability to create economic opportunities, its impact on democratic values, the public's rights and safety, or the potential to address pressing global challenges in health outcomes, climate change, cancer, your career choice reflects a belief that science and technology does important work in the world. Our belief in the transformative potential of science and technology has led us to devote our careers to crafting legal frameworks, to shape its integration into all spheres of economic and social life, to ensure that society can seize its benefits and manage its risks. Our belief in the power of science and technology is well-founded. The scientific and technological innovation at the center of our work are key to our national prosperity and power. They fuel the country's economic growth, expand our ability to tackle challenges to our health and safety, and maintain our national security and global leadership. These innovations are the product of sustained investment in research, specifically public investment in basic research and development. As we gather here today, I'm compelled to warn you that winter is coming, and not just another AI winter, but a deep freeze across the US research and development ecosystem, which would impact our nation for years to come, and certainly impact all of our work. The looming cuts to overhead funding on federal grants, shuttering of grant review processes, which effectively halts grant making, executive orders canceling or freezing tens of billions of dollars in funding for research and international assistance, and firing and laying off thousands of scientists and technologists will devastate our economy, have long-term consequences for the health and well-being of the public, and undermine our progress and leadership on AI. Some of you may be thinking that I'm a little overwrought, that private research funding will fill the gaps, ensuring that progress on AI and in other areas of R&D continues. And while it is true that much of the AI research and development at the moment is centered in the private sector, this is just that, it's a moment. Public investment and public infrastructure, from the flow of the best talent in the world that comes here to attend our research institutions and goes on to the private sector, to the laws and norms that make US R&D the most inclusive and free, to the initiatives on AI governance that aim to ensure that AI is developed in the public interest so that it receives continued public support, and the direct federal investment in basic R&D makes such moments possible. While a large empirical literature estimating social returns to R&D finds they typically well exceed the normal return on other investments, for example, a survey article in 2021 estimates the social return on investments in research is in excess of 20% across agriculture, manufacturing, biomedical research, and in studies of the economy as a whole. The economic uncertainty and public goods nature of basic research outputs impede optimal private investment. Public investment is necessary for sustained progress. And recent research finds that returns on federal non-defense R&D are particularly good investments, paying even larger dividends, generating 140 to 210% return on investment. Federal research is a long-term investment in our future. It generates returns for decades to come. While the impact on productivity might not be instantly visible, research has found it takes at least 5 years before an investment in federal R&D starts to net positive and 4 years before productivity growth starts to be seen. Once realized, that impact has a long tail, contributing to increased productivity for another decade. Public investment in research is sound economic policy, but its national importance goes well beyond its financial return. Research improves lives, from agricultural innovations improving crop yields and food productivity to life-saving public health medicines and treatments and technologies like the gene editing tool CRISPR, to technologies that support our national defense and security, to those that keep our personal information and communications secure. Public R&D funding is particularly essential where research is needed to address public concerns, protection of rights and safety, protection of national security, tackles shared challenges like climate change and disparities in health outcomes, advance public missions rather than create private profit, and do big things that inspire generations to pursue careers in science and engineering and use their creative potential to build a safer, more prosperous future. The fuel for transformative national capabilities, including those that will use AI to advance public missions and those that will address AI's risks, is publicly funded R&D and the ecosystem it cultivates. While a healthy mix of public and private funding is optimal, corporate funding is less likely to attend to collective problems or those that impact less well-resourced communities. The different motivations for research support between universities and corporations matters too. Corporate research is less likely to be published and shared than university research, reducing the positive spillover effects. Corporate research only exists in the broader context of the public research infrastructure. It relies on the students and knowledge universities produce. In addition, private research decreases public oversight, creating space for ethical lapses. Ethical lapses in research can undermine trust in research and science with long-term consequences for the nation's well-being. The instability in the public research funding landscape has had an immediate impact. For example, a collective tracking project shows reductions in PhD admissions across the biomedical sciences between 15 and 50%. Fewer students entering the field will have a long-term impact on R&D. It's just one leading indicator. There are reports of labs and research programs being shuttered, while scientific organizations in other countries report a surge in US applications. Unsurprisingly, given the long tail of public research funding benefits, disruptions in the research funding tranche have long-term effects. Researchers studying earlier negative shocks to federal grants for research at universities found that they reduced high-tech entrepreneurship and research publications. Perhaps not unexpectedly, but maybe a little entertainingly for this group, they did find one area of increased productivity, which was lower quality patents. I'll just leave you with that. So if realized, these looming cuts to public R&D will have long-term ramifications for science and technology and for the public across all 50 states and the globe. These proposed cuts come at a time when other nations have increased their investments in critical areas of research and technology, including AI and AI safety, that will help them prosper. The average rate of increase in Chinese R&D, for example, over the decade from 2010 to 2019, which is the most recent years available, was triple the US rate. The current administration's pullback from research couldn't come at a worse time. As national security leaders wrote to President Trump, Majority Leader Thune, and Speaker Johnson last week, investing in basic research is not optional, it is imperative. To win the technology race with China, we cannot afford to lag in fields that will define the future: AI, quantum, advanced materials, biotechnology, to name a few. Basic research is the seed from which transformative technologies grow, often yielding applications unforeseen at the time of discovery. We cannot predict which lines of inquiry will lead to the next breakthrough. Therefore, we must nurture a diverse array of basic research initiatives. Disruptions in the federal funding ecosystem are directly relevant to the topic at hand, AI governance. In 2018, I asked David Gunning, who was then a proud program manager at the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, where he established one of the first and most recognized programs in the area of explainable AI, to present the work of the DARPA XAI project to BCLT's annual Privacy Law Forum. DARPA launched the Explainable AI Intelligence Project in 2017 with the goal of enabling end users to better understand, trust, and effectively manage artificially intelligent systems. They were pioneers in this field. This early public research investment sparked broad interest in an area directly related to AI governance, and this is just one small example. So during the Biden-Harris administration, we invested in the AI research ecosystem. From the creation of 18 AI institutes across the US through the National Science Foundation-led National Artificial Intelligence Research Institutes program, our research, I want to note, was begun in August of 2020 during the Trump-Pence administration, which established the first 7. Many of these institutes enjoy private support as well, but the public investment means that they are directed towards research that will benefit the public, ranging from promoting ethical and trustworthy AI systems and technologies developing novel approaches to cybersecurity, addressing climate change, expanding our understanding of the brain, and enhancing education and public health. We also launched the National AI Research Resource Pilot. I know it's a mouthful, kind of like my title. It's a national infrastructure led by the NSF in partnership with the Department of Energy and other governmental and non-governmental partners that makes available resources to support the nation's AI research and education. It's supporting research teams across 34 states that are tackling projects covering deep fake detection, AI safety, next generation medical diagnoses, environmental protection, and materials engineering. We also launched the National Science Foundation's Responsible Design, Development, and Deployment of Technologies program. It supports multidisciplinary, multi-sector teams that examine and demonstrate the principles, methodologies, implementation, and impacts associated with responsible design, development, and deployment of technologies in practice. This program is a collaboration between NSF and several philanthropic partners. It and other publicly funded efforts support research that is developing new methods and approaches to ensure that ethical, legal, and societal considerations, as well as community values, are embedded across technology life cycles to generate products that promote the public's well-being and mitigate harm. These public research investments are essential for progress on AI governance. A robust, publicly funded research ecosystem will produce the methods and tools to enhance AI systems to ensure they are fit for purpose, they are trustworthy, they are rights-respecting and safe, and they will help us use AI to advance our nation's grand ambitions and address our gravest risks, whether they arise from adversarial nations seeking to undermine our national security or decades of inaction to address the looming climate crisis. Efforts such as the recently announced Current AI initiative, with its initial $400 million in pledges and a plan to pull in $2.5 billion more over the next 5 years, focused on fostering and steering the development of artificial intelligence in society-beneficial directions, as well as the Partnership on AI and other philanthropic support for responsible AI, are exceedingly important in this moment when federal funding looks like it may lag. But maintaining public funding for research on AI governance-related research is particularly important at this moment. Technical research and technocratic practices and methods are playing an increasingly important role in how we think about and construct our governance regimes. They're essential for interventions in the AI lifecycle, particularly those aimed at shaping design, not just use. The Trump administration should double down on public funding for these AI research initiatives. They should go back to the principles in the first Trump administration, where they centered investments in federal R&D for AI. They should fully fund the NAIR. But of course, innovations are only useful if organizations are incentivized to use them. And there are numerous ways to drive sound AI governance practices across the ecosystem. While I was at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Biden-Harris administration, we were directed by the president to pull every lever to manage AI's risks so we could seize the benefits. While early indications are that the current administration's approach to AI policy will have a different emphasis, I believe key policies of the Biden-Harris administration align with it and hope they will remain in place. Given the time I have this morning, I just want to highlight 2. So first, governing how the federal government develops, uses, and procures AI. During the Biden-Harris administration, one of the key initiatives we put in place was to try to use not just our ability to tell others what to do, but our ability to actually lead by example. So during the administration, the White House Office of Management and Budget issued guidance to federal agencies on the responsible use of AI. There was also a national security memo that established similar requirements for agencies' use of AI on national security systems, and procurement guidance to ensure agencies have the information they need and the freedom to interact with systems that is required to implement the testing, validation, and oversight required for good governance. OMB's guidance to agencies contains the most specific and rigorous set of requirements for the design, use, and procurement of technology by government agencies. I would put it next to anything anywhere across the globe. OMB's guidance to agencies, it directs them to ensure the public's rights and interests, including privacy, non-discrimination, and equity, as well as security and accessibility, are protected and risks to them are mitigated in system design and use. The procurement guidance ensures vendors provide the information and documentation necessary for agencies to rigorously evaluate systems. It requires vendors enable agencies to engage in ongoing oversight of systems, which is necessary because we know that AI systems over time can drift for a whole set of reasons. It also ensures that vendors provide the information and documentation necessary. This includes things like performance and data protection metrics, information about training data, programmatic evaluations, testing and input data. It also directs agencies to contractually require vendors to closely monitor and evaluate performance and risks. Numerous provisions of the procurement guidance are also designed to support competition and avoid vendor lock-in. While these initiatives were directed by President Biden under the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence Executive Order, this guidance is essential to innovation, to efficiency, and common sense provisioning of services to the public. The testing and evaluation requirements set out in the guidance ensure that AI systems work and work for all members of the public. Sure, this is important for equity reasons, but it serves important efficiency objectives. It protects the public's pocketbook. There is nothing more costly than purchasing software that is poorly designed. Numerous governments across the world can attend to not only the direct cost of software failures, including algorithmic failures, but also the cost in terms of public trust. I'll just point out two examples. In 2021, the Dutch government resigned en masse in what was called the kindergarten affair after a poorly designed algorithm kicked tens of thousands of families into poverty and pushed 1,000 children into foster care. In 2020, the UK exam regulator, Ofqual, used a predictive algorithm which downgraded 40% of student exam scores, primarily those from students in disadvantaged areas, while raising exam scores for students in private schools. Students took to the street chanting, "F the algorithm." Poorly designed and badly monitored algorithmic systems, including AI systems, used to make consequential decisions that impact the public's access to resources, undermine public trust in government. They lead to costly litigation and ultimately require government reinvestments in system redesigns. And until those systems are redesigned, the numerous failures require costly out-of-band processes, typically human processes, and there are a few things that cost more money. So the sound system documentation, testing and evaluation, risk mitigation processes that reflects context-specific failure modes, and ongoing monitoring required by the OMB suite of AI guidance is good policy, and it is good and efficient business. It raises the odds that AI systems, whether developed internally or by an external vendor, work for the broad and varied public. Many provisions of the federal AI governance are directly designed to promote competition, which spurs innovation and maintains U.S. leadership in AI. Second, I would urge the new administration to maintain U.S. leadership on the technical aspects of AI governance. The Biden-Harris administration leaned into the technocratic aspects of governance in two key ways, and they are very related. First, by accelerating the hiring of AI and AI-enabling professionals across the federal government. We used flexible hiring authorities. We developed best practices on federal government-wide hiring. We used all of the federal programs, the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, the U.S. Digital Corps, and the U.S. Digital Service. We created a new DHS AI Corps. By the end of the administration, we had made over 250 hires. In addition, the administration launched the DoD STEM Trusted Advisors Pilot Program. I know, another mouthful. But it gives agencies flexible access to talent outside government by creating pools of science, technology, engineering, math, and AI experts that agencies can tap into to support implementation of AI initiatives or other technically complicated issues. The ability to bring in tech experts on an as-needed basis allows the government to tap into a litany of top-tier talent, on key issues from bias evaluations to biological and other risks. It allows academics and others to offer their expertise to support agencies' public missions in more targeted ways, and allows government agencies to access the wide range of technical experts they may need for a limited time to use AI well to advance the nation's interests. We've seen frightening cuts to this technical talent. Technical experts have been fired, and some have resigned because they objected to their skills being used to undermine the government's ability to meet the needs of the American people. Reported cuts on the horizon at the National Institute of Standards and Technology could directly affect our capacity to pursue sound AI governance. Reportedly, up to 500 staffers in the AI Safety Institute or the CHIPS office. Many of these cuts apply to newly hired experts from the private sector, and none take the quality of the employee into account. The loss of quality, public-minded technical talent from the USG workforce will set us back decades at a moment where technology is increasingly important to all government missions. The bench of technical experts in the USG has benefited the public through better public service delivery, the direct file IRS system, for example, better policy decisions, and better oversight and enforcement. In addition, the Biden-Harris administration established the United States AI Safety Institute, housed in the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the Department of Commerce, to advance the science of AI safety, articulate, demonstrate, and disseminate the practices of AI safety, and support institutions, communities, and coordination around AI safety. The administration made an initial investment in the technical expertise and the development of the science base and the technical practices necessary to design, use, and govern AI responsibly, rather than delegating responsibility to the private sector or leaving the field to other nations. But we did more than that. We didn't just lead into the technocratic aspects of AI governance at home. We actually spurred a network of similar AI institutes across the globe. And I think more importantly, established a shared expectation that how we design and evaluate, not just the words on the page, but the practices that bring them to life, are an important component of governance in which not just the private sector, but nonprofits, civil society, and government all need to have a hand. This movement has had great momentum. The AC and sister safety institutes are conducting testing of advanced models and systems to assess potential and emerging risks. They are developing guidelines on evaluations and risk mitigations and performing and coordinating technical research to develop a sound science base for AI safety. They are doing this work through multi-stakeholder processes. Unfortunately, the cuts in funding and firings have been coupled with a retreat from key international venues of scientific and technology policy. Yes, these include the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization. But most relevant to our conversation today, the US seems to be stepping back from robust cooperative international engagement on AI governance. The US did not include technical staff from the US AI Safety Institute in its delegation to the Paris AI Summit. And the administration declined to sign the summit declaration calling for ensuring AI is open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, secure, and trustworthy. Despite its non-binding nature and its similarity to declarations at the 2 previous AI summits. Stepping back from international efforts to develop shared frameworks, tools, and methods to ensure responsible development and use of AI is not in the interest of U.S. competitiveness. It will undermine U.S. national interests, and it puts democratic values at risk. U.S. experts and U.S. values must continue to inform this global effort. Stepping back from the technical AI governance work will leave a gap, and other countries will fill it, not only with their experts, but with their technical practices and with their values. I urge the new administration to stay engaged on all aspects of the important AI policy debates, including those about responsible governance. In closing, I want to express my immense gratitude for the opportunity to serve the country in an administration that so deeply understood the importance of technology and its governance to good government, strong democracies, and the possibilities that define the American story. Throughout history, advances in technology have challenged us. Each leap in capability brings new opportunities and with them new risks. How we design, use, and refuse technology is a key way our nation manifests our values. I hope our conversations today support progress on the important work that lies ahead. Thank you. I don't know if there's time for questions. Pam will tell me. Thank you. Was that too somber? All right.
Thank you so much for your leadership. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you so much for your leadership. I just wanted to know if you could comment a little bit, and I apologize, I came in a little after drop-off, but if you could comment on what you see in terms of the continuity, if any, between the regimes and what you're seeing the Trump administration do. Thanks.
Yeah, I tried to draw some of those. So, there are things, for example, the AI research institutes that were started under the first Trump administration, publishing AI use cases, started under the Trump administration. Lynn Parker, who is currently at OSTP again, actually spanned the Trump and Biden-Harris administration, and I think had an early hand in some of the OMB guidance documents. And so I think there are some very strong technical professionals within OSTP. I think, like everybody else in the room, my faith in any of my own predictions about how things might play out, given early surprises of this administration. I find it, hard to make serious projections, but I do think, OMB 2410, which is the federal guidance on AI policy, is still the law. It has not been ripped out, and there is, as Colleen, as you noted yesterday, there is an RFI out on an AI action plan, and I think we'll know more in a little bit, and we'll also know a little bit more once Michael Kratsios is, fully back at OSTP.
Thank you, Deirdre. This is great. When I go back to, you commented on the NAIR pilot and advocating for its sustainable authorization and funding, with which I certainly disagree. Has there been any...
You disagree or you...
Oh, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Phew.
I know that we can disagree these days, I think, still for a little while longer. But no, I agree with you on that point. My question is, are you seeing in other countries, the re-energizing of efforts to do government-supported clouds or other sort of AI-related resources specific to researchers or available to researchers, either in direct response to what's happening in the US or sort of as part of a larger strategy to build AI ecosystems in those other countries?
I think certainly during my time in the administration, we certainly saw strong steps in that direction, and I believe they're continuing. I don't have particular examples to offer you, although I suspect some of my colleagues who were at OSTP with me, who were in the room, Olivia Zhu and Nick Marta over there might have some specific examples, so we might want to talk to them later. I'm happy to end on time or even early, but I'm also happy to entertain other questions. There obviously are many, many things that the administration did on AI policy, and I was trying to be respectful of time. Yeah, Colleen's going to ask another question.
Not often that I get to ask these kind of questions, but now that you're not in government, I was wondering if you could comment on the M memo. And thinking back on it, when I was reading it, I could tell that there was a lot of different people that had contributed to it. There's a lot of different ideas in there and different requirements. So if you were going to go back and sort of have the mandate, let's say you now stayed with the administration, the new administration, and they told you, basically cut it down to the bare bones of what we really, really need. Take out all the stuff that we don't need. And you also sort of heard Trump's mandate of, I'm not saying that, if you had to take something out, and it's hard, I know, to choose between your children. But if you read the mandate that we need to remove any barriers to fast deployment, we're thinking about the DMV as the agency we want to reform, not thinking about people mistakenly being prosecuted for a wrongful arrest. But if you're thinking about that, where are there places where you think you would be you would prioritize for potentially reshaping a bit?
So I think there are two answers to that. The memo looks really favorable in comparison to the AI Act. What weighs in at like 34 pages, maybe 40? I don't know. It's a pretty slim, mean document. And I actually don't think I'd go back and cut anything out of that document. What I would do is invest in things like you're going to find this funny, I'm sure, the DHS biometric test facility. So we have NIST, which allows for lots of testing. You can test an algorithm, right? It creates data sets, it creates protocols. The DHS biometric test facility actually provides testing of complete systems to see and evaluate their performance. And there are very few places in government that have rigorous testing facilities to support that context-specific testing pre-deployment. And that is incredibly important. As we know, systems often fail, not because of the algorithm, but because of lots of other things that surround it. The ways in which humans are interacting with it, the data that is being fed into it, the lighting conditions, if we think about biometrics, right? It can be a whole range of things. And so one of the things that I would do to make sure that the OMB memo obligations could be met swiftly by agencies is investing in that sort of applied testing infrastructure. It's incredibly important for all governments. Second, one of the things that we were doing in the administration is prioritizing which systems do we want to tackle first. And, another thing that I spent a lot of time on was working with DHS and DOJ on guidance for the use of biometric technologies, and particularly facial recognition technologies. And that's a recognition that there are some technologies that are in use and are having quite a large impact on the public already. And so I do think that it's always important to think about triaging. And I think that's something that we were doing, but it's something that I would encourage the government to do is there are these high value systems that we know have had consequential impacts on individuals and are being more broadly used, not just across the public sector, but also in the private sector. I think Margot's description the other day of the very limited prohibition the AI Act places on real-time use of biometrics in public places for law enforcement purposes gives you a sense of the breadth of places and conditions under which these systems are being used. And it's incredibly important for us to have policies about their efficacy and their performance across populations. It also is, of course, incredibly important to set guidance and boundaries on where they can and cannot be used. And the AI Act isn't the only place we see that. If you look at the National Security Memo and the accompanying governance frameworks, you'll also see that there were some hard lines drawn about where the US government won't use that technology.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation, Deirdre. Oh, back here. Sorry, David Harris, Haas School of Business. I loved the executive order that you put out, that you worked on. And there was one area that I thought was particularly interesting, the choice to use the term dual use in the order. And also the section of it that required reporting on the part of companies to the government if the models had greater than 10 to the 26th floating point operations in the training compute. So I was wondering if you could talk more about that. Do you think that's a successful framing? Does the term dual use continue to make sense for you? Do you think that the new administration will continue to think about AI in that way? Or do you think that after the Paris summit and the developments of the last few weeks, is that framework out now?
So, I mean, I think like the term dual use is descriptive, accurately descriptive. And I think Margot kind of pointed out when we're talking about models, many of the models that we're talking about are things that end up being used. Yes, they get tailored and trained for specific environments. But if we're talking about some of the models themselves, that they are, and I'm going to use model in a generic way, they are dual use, right? Or multi-use, we might even say. I think everyone in the administration, I think, would agree with this, but I will just speak for myself. Emphasis on technical properties, 10 to the 26 and things like that, they're poor proxies. They're both under and over inclusive of systems that we might care about. And so I think that you can look at that as an opportunity to buy some time to do the important work that NIST, the AI Safety Institutes, public universities, private researchers are trying to do to figure out how to govern these systems and how to mitigate risks. And I think like the most robust place to look at for what I think about as like a systematic approach is the work on biological systems in the executive order and some of the follow-on work that happened. And that when we think about risks that models might contribute to producing, right? We can think about outputs of models that are the harm in themselves. For example, the production of, a CSAM image, right? That we can view that as a harm in itself, versus places where the output of a model might increase the probability of harm. And in those instances, thinking about the richer ecosystem and where we can intervene most effectively, I think is super important. And you'll see that in the biological framework. And as many people have said, risk mitigations are often not going to be at the model level. They're going to be other place in the ecosystem. And it's really important for us to be building out our understanding of the various intervention opportunities and the governance and technical needs we have to address and intervene in those points. Thank you.
All right, so if the federal panel please join us at the stage. My name is Colleen Chien. I'm a professor at Berkeley Law. I'm a co-director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology. I, like Deirdre, also worked in both the Biden administration. I also worked in the Obama administration. I worked at OSTP. But right now I'm coming to you actually, not in any of those capacities, but right now in my introductory remarks. You can come up. I'm going to be talking to you as a mother, because I was just involved in getting text messages, automated text messages this week that alerted me to my son being in a lockdown. He's a freshman in college at his college. And the messages I was receiving were extremely alarming. I woke up on Wednesday morning and I got the message no mother ever wants to hear. Emergency alert, police are looking for suspect, black male, 6'4", wearing a gray hoodie. Avoid area, shelter in place. And I continue to get these automated messages for 3 or 4 hours. The description didn't go a lot further. It talked about UVA has issued a shelter in place. He's in this location, that location. He fled an off-grounds traffic stop and has a known criminal history and a gang affiliation. And I still didn't see any information that would help me understand why I was getting this message, why the entire university, the entire med school, during a time when students are in midterms, they're stressed as it is, the parents were in the Facebook group saying, what's going on with my kid? They're locked in a room, the doors don't lock, we have to barricade ourselves in. My kid was fortunately in his room, but he was also really scared. He was worried about his midterms. His roommates weren't there, his friends were not with him. And we just continue to get this message. And again, there was no indication that this person was a risk, that he was armed or anything. And there was no proof at the end of the incident that he was, in fact, armed. I'm not going to go into all the details, but what I will say is that while this was happening, again, we're just continuing to get these updates, and they were just automated, and they're just continuing to come. They decided to cancel classes for the day. They had to reschedule midterms. Thousands of people were inconvenienced, both the students, but also the family members, everybody that was involved. And again, there was no evidence that was given to us that there was anything that would result in the need to have this type of response. Now, of course, later on I learned that because I don't go to the school, I'm very unfamiliar with the school, there was a mass shooting at the school in 2022. So some of this sort of trauma, I think, coming through at the institutional level, I can understand. But this gentleman was still not very clear to me what was going on. I thought perhaps there's a bomb threat, right? There must be something else they're not explaining to us because it just does not seem proportional. So that happened on Wednesday, and then yesterday, while I was here giving my speech on giving a primer for this amazing panel we're about to hear, I started getting text messages. And I was just trying to stay on time because I knew I needed to be finished at a certain time, but I started getting text messages, and they said, alert, active attacker with a knife, reported, moving, run, hide, fight. And then it said later on, WM, red hoodie, black pants, white tennis shoes. Continue to shelter in place. A little, about an hour and a half, thank goodness, by the time my panel was over, a little bit after that, they did say, okay, now the shelter in place is lifted. But again, this is highly disruptive to all the people that were involved, all the parents who had already on the second day, in 2 days, had received these notices. And it also gave me a sense of, well, what exactly is going on in this situation? What eventually became clear is that there was a homeless person involved in a fight with another homeless person. Neither of them had any affiliation with UVA, and one had a knife. And to me, again, I do not understand. My own sense of safety is not heightened, is not increased when they shut down the entire school for this one incident. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about safety. We're going to talk about automation. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about how AI deployed in broad strokes like this, as Deirdre says, can be extremely dangerous. We know that humans make mistakes as well, but when they do, the consequences are not as wide-ranging. If everybody's text message is now blowing up with this information as opposed to a smaller group, the harm is contained. And so I think I want to put that out as my initial prompt just as a human being. I'll put my academic hat back on now and introduce the panel because I'm really excited to talk to them about these issues that they've been grappling with, both from the technical side as computer scientists and as law professors and professors in general. So we're going to start with two people who have a lot of knowledge of what the previous administration, the Biden administration, did, how they got to this point, the points they did in terms of what Deirdre just described. And we're going to hear from them first. We're then going to hear from two folks who've worked and observed what's going on, both from an academic perspective as well as in industry, to understand, well, when these systems are deployed, how does it actually hit the ground? How do we actually make sure that we are creating safety, we are giving space for innovation, and we're not creating systems that are ultimately going to result in some outcomes that are not desirable? So I want to start with Sorelle Friedler, who is a computer scientist and professor at Haverford, who worked in the White House, serving as the Assistant Director for Data and Democracy at the OSTP. And her work included the AI Bill of Rights, which is such an important document, and I'm really excited to hear from her. She's going to be followed by Olivia Zhu, who was working with Deirdre, and also a computer scientist working in the White House at OSTP. She helped coordinate the M memo, so I may ask her the same question about what she might do if she had to change it, as the Assistant Director for AI Policy. Before that, she was a Presidential Innovation Fellow. And before that, she worked in industry. She's now back there, so she really understands what's up in terms of what companies can do. So I'm going to start with them too, and then we will go on and proceed. So Sorelle, take it away. Yeah, the slides should be there, yes. And then the clicker should be here.
Okay. Moving slides.
Yeah.
Does that work? Yeah, that does a thing. Yes. Okay. Hey, everybody. It's good to be with you today. So you've gotten already this morning sort of a landscape survey of a whole lot of things that happened under the Biden-Harris administration on AI. And here I'm going to dive into like one particular piece of it, which is the AI Bill of Rights. But I wanted to start by giving a definitely biased history of responsible AI and the work on responsible AI and where that came from. So I sort of come in my own research background from the fair machine learning academic community, and specifically from the community focused on fairness, accountability, and transparency. And some of the earliest work within there, thinking about sort of technical approaches to fairness and non-discrimination, goes back to about 2008. There was then what were known then as the FATML workshops that sort of brought together folks from across academia, meaning like not just computer scientists like me, right, but also lawyers, social scientists, and also some civil society folks. And now that conference is ongoing and really thriving, right? In its first year in 2018, I think there were like 17 papers, and now there's regularly hundreds and hundreds of attendees. There's also a strand of sort of related overlapping work, but that I think is especially important in a policy space, about audits, right? And one of the key early works on audits is by LaTanya Sweeney at Harvard in 2013, showing ways that Google searches for Black names were more likely to pull up things like LaTanya Sweeney arrested. And that work has continued and has recently partially fed into what resulted in a DOJ and HUD settlement with Meta regarding discriminatory housing ads. There was then, sort of following up on a lot of this energy, a strand of work focused on creating principles, okay, right? So now that some of these harms have been identified, what should we do about them? What are the high-level principles that we should be thinking about in terms of AI governance? And this, again, included academia, but also included industry, and then more recently included government actors, right? The Pentagon, OECD, and so on. And then, of course, and I hear you all heard about this yesterday, there's also been the EU AI Act, and there was also a treaty process in the Council of Europe. As I said, this is an incomplete history, right? And some of the things that I've left out here include civil society engagement, and especially early engagement under the name big data as opposed to AI, and also the related data privacy conversation, right? So there's sort of a lot that is not in this picture. But this is sort of the lay of the land when I was at the White House and we were working on the AI Bill of Rights, right? So the AI Bill of Rights we can think of as sort of the White House's sort of latest iteration of AI ethics principles, right? And you might say, well, there were a whole bunch of AI ethics principles already. What was the point, right? And it is absolutely true that it built on all of that work. So the AI Bill of Rights that we put out in October 2022 indeed included 5 principles that are largely the same principles that you will see in most of these other documents, right? In that way, it was not particularly breaking new ground, though it was important and a statement from the White House saying that these things matter and that we should hold ourselves as government, but also beyond that, to these principles. Within this document, we also tried to do some of the hard work to make these principles one step more actionable. And so one of the key pieces there is deciding, when do we care about these principles, right? What systems should we apply them to? And the scope that we decided on for this document is that they should be applied with respect to automated systems. So we very purposefully didn't use the word AI there because some people think of sort of lighter versions of AI, right? Like linear regression or small decision trees as not quite being AI, even though as a computer scientist who teaches these topics, you know, I teach linear regression, right? It's certainly AI in my class. But in order to sort of get away from that debate, we wanted to really actually focus on the use, because it is not, in fact, the AI systems that my students are creating in class that are the ones that we're concerned about, right? We're concerned about them once they're actually used on people to make important decisions that influence their rights, opportunity, or access. And so that's really how we scoped the document. And then a key part of this, we wanted to really go beyond just principles, right? Beyond just a statement of, you know, 5 important values, but which can seem not to tell people actually what to do, right? And so the document itself is actually 73 pages. So as you might imagine, it includes more than just those 5 principles. And what we really tried to do in the rest of the document is, in an approachable way that we hope is sort of readable to the general public, explain why we need these principles, right? Lay out instances of real harm. And then, and this is the real, I would say, meat of the document, lay out what should be expected for each of these principles in order to protect people from harm, right? What are the practical steps that technologists and policymakers can take to put in place proactive protections? And just to give you sort of a sense of what these look like, this is an example from the Algorithmic Discriminations Protection Principle. And the idea here was essentially to create a checklist, right? So in the full document, there's obviously more text associated, sort of explaining each of these items. But the idea is that in order to protect the public from algorithmic discrimination, there should be proactive assessment of equity and design. You should make sure that you're using representative and robust data, guarding against proxies, doing a disparity assessment and mitigation, doing ongoing monitoring, and especially important, having public transparency and independent evaluation of these systems, right? And so what we tried to do is lay out each of these things. Now, as anybody who's looked at the document will note, right up front, there is a long disclaimer saying, you know, any resemblance that this may have to policy should please be ignored, right? Because formally it was a white paper coming out of OSTP. So formally it does not constitute binding guidance for the public or federal agencies and does not require compliance, right? That said, obviously what we were trying to do was to make the sort of policy landscape a little bit richer by giving people the tools that are based in, you know, the research community and in previous policy actions to try to say, okay, if you wanted, right, to live up to these principles, what would you functionally need to do? That was followed by the AI executive order that we've already heard a little bit about. And in that executive order, right, it directed OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to build on the AI Bill of Rights and to create binding guidance for federal agencies. The draft guidance for that was put out just a few days after the executive order, and then was finalized about 6 months later. And I think that's where I pass it off to my former colleague, Olivia.
Great. And as we're making the transition, I just want to mention that each speaker is going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, but you can save your questions or you can write them and they'll bring them up to us. And we'll also take questions as much time as we have at the end. I'll ask one question to Sorelle because I think the White House Bill of Rights is so important, AI blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. And I was curious about your role as a computer scientist, if you felt that you were sort of had a particular hat on in terms of how you presented in that forum and also how the technical community was providing input to the process.
Yeah, so I sort of started the story, I guess, in 2022, but it actually started a year before. And so a year before that, we put out a sort of public call that this was going to be happening and that we were going to receive input. And so there was a year of sort of public input of a variety of forms, right? So one of the things we did was convened groups of experts, which included computer scientists, technical experts, but also civil society and other right? To just be able to show up and say, here's what I think about biometrics and the way that they're being used in our life. And they were lovely to go to. We held them like in the evenings so that people could come after work, sort of online, and people could log in just to give their feedback. We had like high school students after school talking to us about, recent protests they had been to and how the drone surveillance going on at those protests made them feel uncomfortable. We had parents coming in to talk about the facial recognition use in their kids' school. It was, I just thought, wonderful, and a wonderful chance to really hear from the public on the issue. Yes, so there was a whole sort of long lead up to that.
Thank you so much.
Great, nice to be here today. Thank you all for having me. Excited to be back in Berkeley. I'm from the Bay Area originally. As a quick reintroduction, my name is Olivia Zhu. I am the former Assistant Director for AI Policy at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. I had the privilege of working for Deirdre, and I also had the privilege of working at the Office of Management and Budget, which is also associated with the Executive Office of the President during the Biden-Harris administration. I previously came from the tech industry, so I worked at Microsoft Research and Amazon building and launching AI models, software engineer, software development manager. So this is really my first foray into policy, and I spent about 3 years at the White House. I have this week rejoined Microsoft in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, continuing work on responsible AI, but I want to note today that my views and my statements do not reflect Microsoft's views or statements here. So Sorelle gave an amazing introduction to the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And I think what I'll do is continue. I have a lot of thoughts on the AI executive order, but given that's been rescinded by the Trump administration, I think today it might make sense to focus on M2410, the policy for government use of AI, and thoughts on how the Trump administration might potentially, suggestions on how they could revise it. Like Deirdre mentioned, I think it's very hard to speculate. I've been surprised by a lot of the recent developments that have happened recently, so I don't think I have a good meter on what the future administration might do. Great, so I will, is this the
It's working out.
slide advancing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the big green button.
I'm not a professor, guys, so this is this is new to me.
Green button in the top.
Oh, the big green one. I was doing the laser,
There we go.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm clearly not the professor among this group, but it's still good to be here. Quick show of hands just to get a lay of the land. How many people have read M2410? Oh, that's good. That's like about half, it seems. Hopefully this talk can cater to both people who've read it and who are familiar with it, and those who may be less familiar with it. So like Sorelle mentioned, this was announced by Vice President Harris in March of 2024, so almost a year ago. And the purpose of this policy is to govern the federal government's own use of AI. So this is the use of AI by every federal agency, and when they're using AI to serve the public, what they should or should not do with regard to the use of AI. I first want to talk about, I know there's probably a lot of lawyers in this room, and I'm not a lawyer either, but I will talk about the legal backing behind M2410. So this was not something the White House just decided to do out of the blue. This has really strong grounding in multiple congressional or laws from Congress on its existence. So first, the AI and Government Act of 2020 directed the Office of Management and Budget to issue this guidance. And specifically, one thing I want to point out is one of the clauses in this law is to identify best practices for identifying, assessing, and mitigating any discriminatory impact or bias on the basis of any classification protected under federal non-discrimination laws. So you'll notice, and as Deirdre mentioned in her opening, there's a lot of provisions around protecting rights and safety, and those aren't something that I think should be a partisan issue. In fact, they are a bipartisan issue and was passed and grounded in a law by Congress. So it stands to see what the Trump administration will do with that, but that's not necessarily something I can speculate too much on. I will note, though, that in their AI executive order that they issued in the first week of this administration, they did promise to rewrite M2410 in 60 days. So I think that ends up being sometime in March is when they plan on issuing a revised version of M2410. So they are presumably actively working on this and probably thinking through a lot of the same questions today. I will say that's not really a surprise. This policy was never intended to be something that was static. As we know, AI is moving at a really rapid pace. Technology is advancing really quickly. Practices in responsible AI are also iterating very quickly. And so the AI and Government Act requires OMB to actually update this guidance every 2 years. The Trump administration will be doing that a little bit sooner than that 2-year mark. But again, this was just never meant to be a static policy. So I think updates are always warranted, and especially in the face of such a rapidly evolving technology. Okay, so M2410 consists of 3 different pillars: governance, innovation, and risk management. We'll focus the majority of today's talk on risk management and the provisions there, but I'll quickly touch on the governance and innovation portions. So specifically, the governance portion requires chief AI officers to have technical AI leadership at agencies. It requires agency AI governance boards, so people at agencies to be looking at how AI is used, deployed, and procured across their agency. And it also requires AI use case inventories by agencies, which is just a list of all of the AI that they're using. The second pillar, innovation, requires things like agency AI strategies. So agencies need to have like a 2 to 4 year look ahead on where they want AI to be going in the future, and how they plan to get there. Has provisions around requiring AI talent at agencies, which is something that Deirdre touched on. You can't build AI at an agency without AI talent, without a lot of technical talent. So making sure that agencies are well equipped to have that talent. Open government data, releasing AI model weights and code, and a council of chief AI officers to share learnings and promote innovation, not only within agencies, but also across the federal government. So a couple comments on where I think the Trump administration may decide to keep some of these provisions. The chief AI officers are actually, I think, have some rooting in Executive Order 13960, which was issued by the Trump administration, which appointed responsible AI officers. And the Trump administration, I think, has indicated that they plan to keep AI leadership at agencies. I think that's great, but I think without the provision around AI talent and people to staff those chief AI officers and actually build AI, that's relatively meaningless. And so I think it'll be a very interesting contrast to see how the work of Doge and Elon Musk, which is cutting AI talent at agencies, like Deirdre mentioned, will square with the need for AI leadership and to build AI for efficiency at federal agencies. Okay, moving on to the risk management section. So I think you all have read the document. It's pretty long, well, it's not that long. It's 37 pages, but pretty dense. So I'm a very visual person, so I like to break it down into generally a visual description here. So if we think about all the government uses of AI for a second, the government has a really broad and wide-ranging mission. Some of the most exciting, some of my favorite, not necessarily the most exciting, AI use cases that federal government has are, for example, NOAA is using AI to better predict the weather, to better predict heat, and give weather alerts to people. I don't know if they're still doing that, given that NOAA was cut yesterday, but we'll assume that they are. So we've got everything from weather prediction to DHS uses AI to spot people in the water. They have the Coast Guard, so they use computer vision to say, like, okay, here's a person in the water, you need to go rescue them, which I think is great. To things like the Department of Veterans Affairs is using AI to predict which veterans are most likely to commit suicide, to give them additional health care. And that's public information that's in their AI use case inventory. The Social Security Administration is using AI to determine, to expedite processing of disability benefits. So when you apply to the Social Security Administration for disability benefits, they're using AI to determine whose application should be prioritized. That's also public information. As you can see, a couple of those AI use cases are higher sensitivity than others. Weather prediction, or there's one AI use case, which is turtle face recognition. So environmental monitoring, there's really turtle face recognition. Like, you need to know what kind of turtle came up to the underwater camera, so you know what kind of turtles are swimming around in the ocean, which is so key, but less high risk than processing disability benefits. So you can see really the wide range of AI use case inventories, and that is technically a link, but it doesn't work on this thing, to the federal AI use case inventories, which shows the over 1,000 uses of AI in the federal government. So very wide. So what the MMO does is it prioritizes 2 types of AI as higher risk. So specifically safety impacting AI, so AI which may impact someone's safety. For example, the Coast Guard example could be considered one of those. And rights impacting AI. So AI which has the ability to impact someone's rights, which definitely includes the Department of Veterans Affairs suicide prediction algorithm, as well as the Social Security disability benefits processing algorithm. So those are the 2 large categories where the federal government says, these are the things that require higher oversight. Everything else, agencies should continue to innovate, Practices are good, but not required. But these are two that they're higher scrutiny. And if you're asking, how are agencies going to determine what is specifically safety impacting or rights impacting, the MMO prescribes certain categories where AI uses are automatically presumed to be safety impacting or rights impacting. These are rather exhaustive, but here this gives you a sense of some of the categories which are in that section. So for example, safety impacting if AI controls electrical grids, manages industrial waste, maintains election integrity, then it's considered safety impacting. And for rights impacting AI, if it's used in law enforcement risk assessments, detecting student cheating, used to screen tenants, it's considered rights impacting. And so this is just guidance to help agencies automatically categorize what is safety impacting or rights impacting, so that determination isn't left up to every one of the federal agencies which is implementing this guidance. Okay, and then more specifically, I think the major part of Section 5 on managing risks is to prescribe minimum risk management practices in each of those categories. So there is, if you look in green, I think it kind of shows up as green here, minimum risk management practices for safety impacting AI. And then for rights impacting AI, what happens is those rights impacting AI use cases are required to implement both the minimum risk management practices for the safety impacting AI and additional minimum risk management practices for rights impacting AI. And all these practices we'll go through in the next couple slides, but they were heavily informed by the work in the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Okay, so what are some of the examples of minimum risk management practices? I'll break the categories down into pre-deployment, so before you deploy a model, and then post-deployment after you deploy a model. First, for example, for safety impacting AI, again, we're keeping with the green and then the purple color coding for safety versus rights impacting AI. For safety impacting AI, agencies are required to do an AI impact assessment. For rights impacting AI, also required to identify impacts on equity and fairness. They're required to do community engagement for rights impacting AI. They're required to test performance in a real world context for both safety and rights impacting AI. And they're also required to independently evaluate the AI. And I think there might be some technologists in this room, but honestly, I think these are pretty basic practices for deploying AI at all and making sure they're effective. Specifically, all these things are necessary to test the performance, to understand whether the AI is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and to improve its performance in the future. And for post-deployment monitoring, there are practices like ongoing monitoring for discrimination, regularly evaluating the risks from AI, mitigating emerging risks, human training and assessment, human intervention, public notice, and maintaining a lot of options for rights impacting AI like opt-out, human consideration, remedy, and notice if there's a negatively impacted individual by an AI system. Okay, so that's the broad overview of where M2410 stands today. I'm not sure where we are on time, but I'm happy to do a really quick 2 minutes. Okay, I think we can go backwards here. Okay, I found the button. A really quick thought on where specifically the MMO could be improved, extended, and how within this framework the Trump administration could think about updating M2410. So here there are two specific categories, safety impacting and rights impacting AI. But it's totally possible to add a third category. So my proposed personal opinions, of course, category that I think that the MMO could add is worker impacting AI. So there are some examples of AI which impact federal workers. So for example, the turtle face recognition doesn't impact anyone's safety, doesn't impact anyone's rights, but it might impact, the person working at NOAA who was responsible for labeling turtle faces before. They might be out of a job, right, or fear of automation of the job, and there are different practices that could be used to automate that. And so I think if the Trump administration was interested, they could add another category in that sense. Also, in this structure, it's really easy to adjust the AI uses which are automatically presumed to be safety impacting or rights impacting. And so those lists are very easy to edit. Say that there was a forgotten, category or whatnot. Really easy to add or subtract different categories within the rights or impacting or safety impacting sections. As an American citizen, I do feel like the rights impacting and safety impacting categories should be core regardless of which administration we're in. But again, that's to be determined on what specifically happens. And then similarly, I think in terms of the practices, like I mentioned before, practices are always evolving. And so the memo is written such that, for example, if there are edits necessary to certain practices, additional technical practices that should be added for either safety impacting or rights impacting AI, those are very easy to add based on the latest state of AI, technological advancements and technological advancements in monitoring. And so I think that's, something that's very easy to slot another practice in one of these. Great, and I think we're probably at time, so happy to pass it off to the next presenter.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Mona Sloane, who is an assistant professor of data science and media studies at the University of Virginia. She's a sociologist who studies the intersection of technology and society, specifically in the context of AI. She co-convenes the Co-opting AI speaker series and also serves as the technology editor for the public books. So Mona, take it away.
All right. I don't have slides. Think podcast. Thank you so much, Colleen. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, everybody at UC Berkeley Law for putting this wonderful conference together. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, especially amongst this esteemed panel. And it's great to be back in a space with old and new friends. Now, it has been a while since I was in a room that was mostly filled with lawyers. And as I was preparing for this event today, I was feeling a little bit the pressure of wanting to make my remarks as lawyerly as possible. As a sociologist, of course, that is a little bit in vain. I am a social scientist, not a lawyer. So what you will hear from me today are some thoughts on what a social science perspective can bring to these discussions and conversations around the practice of AI governance. Now, before I start the rest of my remarks, I want to pick up on what Colleen said earlier. I am a professor at the University of Virginia. I was not on site when these two lockdowns happened. I was already traveling. I was in Phoenix before I came here, and then I was here when the second lockdown happened. I can confirm that this was an extremely stressful situation, and in my personal capacity as a researcher, I will say this is a really good example of what happens when different definitions of key concepts like safety or risk clash in high-stakes situations, and we don't take into account what these concepts mean for the different key stakeholders, including parents, but also, of course, students. Now, in my growing research group, Sloane Lab, we are actually building out or hoping to build out student-led AI governance on grounds. We are hoping to actually propose and implement a student technology council. This is a research project that we're currently running in my lab where we're conducting listening sessions. We're also conducting participatory design workshops with students on these sort of thornier questions. And we hope that will help change how we think about implementing AI systems and technology and govern across UVA. Now, talking about the social in AI and in AI governance seems timely. I think it is fair, and everybody has sort of said this today, and I'm sure yesterday, that we are at an inflection point. While Europe has, at long last, it took them a while, settled on and implemented the EU AI Act and its risk-based framework, the US has recently performed this sort of infamous U-turn that we heard about. The 23 executive order emphasized AI-related risks and called for stronger oversight and explicit guidelines for agencies and required them to critically scrutinize AI claims, involve civil rights officials in procurement, and establish risk management protocols. However, as we heard, these regulations were reversed recently in 25 with a recently signed executive order, which explicitly removes previous requirements for fairness assessments, signaling a really strategic pivot towards AI dominance as a competitive advantage rather than a regulated public good. And of course, this has massive signaling power and quite serious trickle-down effects, even if we sort of put on a pragmatist look at this through a pragmatist lens, if you will. The US federal government is one of the largest technology consumers globally, and my understanding is that in 2023 alone, over $100 billion were allocated to IT projects. So if you think about it, most US tech is a la Mariana Mazzucato, courtesy of the taxpayer. Now, the representatives of this very powerful tech investor seem no longer interested in the guardrails that were so very carefully developed over the past couple of years. Many of you have put so much work into this. Now, I think that does not mean that AI governance will go away. Almost to the contrary, I would argue. And this is really where the social science part comes in. AI is sinking deeper and deeper into our infrastructures of everyday life. Again, this is a great example. In many ways, it already is what I would call social infrastructure because it is everywhere we look and because it mediates our social world. For example, AI plays in the role in recruiting and therefore sits between people and the labor market. AI is used in criminal justice, deeply affecting civil rights. And AI helps automate loan decisions, affecting if and how people can build wealth and financial wellness. AI also increasingly moves into the background and only shows when it breaks, which is, and the science and technology scholars among you will know this, that is a classic feature of infrastructure. As AI as the technological spectacle moves into the background, the social, I would say, really decidedly moves to the fore, like the light bulb, the telephone, or the internet before it. AI, quite simply, is something that we do as part of doing other things, and it may be instructive to think about AI governance in that way as well, as a social practice, especially as federal protections have all but disappeared, while states have pushed ahead. Some states, US states, have pushed ahead and filled the void, which is a phenomenon that Stefan Verholst and I have called AI localism, which of course causes much confusing for vendors and the public alike. If we do and think AI socially in that way, we can actually make interesting forays into AI governance. And what I want to do now is present you with sort of 3 of these forays today. The first one is about AI and procurement. The second one is about AI audits. And the third one is about AI research, innovation, and development. Now, we know that teams responsible for AI procurement are often ill-equipped to assess AI systems due to a lack of clear evaluation frameworks, in-house expertise, or standardized procurement methodologies. The absence of defined procurement parameters, structured assessment processes, and sort of adaptable technological infrastructure creates, again, a fragmented environment. However, agencies often have to react to immediate needs, leading to procurement environments that lack transparency and an accountable integration of these emerging technologies. There's also a growing vendor influence in AI procurement. When agencies lack in-house expertise, vendors play a significant role in shaping AI knowledge and literacy, and of course, procurement practices. In a deregulation-oriented administration, AI adoption may be driven more by industry's capabilities rather than by government-defined needs. Vendor procurement risks embedding commercial incentives into administrative decision-making. That can lead to cost inefficiencies, potential security vulnerabilities, and we can talk about what that means in the age of generative AI, and the prioritization of proprietary AI models over open source or more adaptable alternatives. It can also spill over in the space of AI auditing, where large vendors, which already have contracts with government agencies, add on algorithmic auditing to their service portfolio, which incentivizes government agencies to contract these services through their existing vendors. Taking a social approach to these problems means to steer clear from prescribing abstract pathways to procurement innovation in order to account for AI risks, But I would say it means equipping teams and individuals with knowledges and tools to address AI procurement issues within the specific cultures of their organizations and fields. Together with 2 colleagues, amongst them Ruman Chowdhury and some colleagues from IEEE, we conducted a project in 21 called the AI Procurement Project. And we hosted a range of roundtables with experts, global experts, and we came up with 6 tension points that cut across AI procurement issues generally. Those range from inconsistent definitions to incentives and organizational structures. And we also provided a set of questions that we hope allow practitioners to address these tension points within specific contexts. What we also did is we outlined a number of narrative traps that typically hinder innovation in AI procurement. For example, quote, one incentive shared across all actors can change everything, end of quote. Or, quote, we must find simple definitions of X, end of quote. Now, all of these interventions pull social structures that enable AI governance to the fore. Now, taking the cue from social structure and social practice, we can also look at AI auditing. I've worked on AI auditing for many years within my lab and with wonderful collaborators, often or really born out of a frustration with AI auditing that was happening everywhere, especially in sort of 2019, 2020, 21, where companies, sometimes in tandem with academic researchers, were using rather narrow interpretations of AI auditing to what I would call audit wash, fairly shady technology. A now infamous example is the Pymetrics audit. This audit technically, and I'm using this word deliberately, followed the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures and its 4/5 rule, finding that the system did not violate this rule. We can talk a little bit later, a little bit more about the details of this case. So that technically wasn't discrimination across protected categories. What this audit did not do was audit for harmful assumptions baked into this particular AI product. That product requires job candidates to play so-called behavior-based neuroscience games, which are designed to measure, quote, behavior from cognitive and emotional attributes, end of quote, and use AI to compare the game behavior of these candidates to the game behavior of an organization's most successful employees to make predictions about job fit and future success of the game player. Now, these assumptions, the assumptions in here is A, that game behavior is a valid indicator or proxy for job fit and future success, and that games are accessible, especially these kinds of games, to everybody, which is of course not true. To address this issue, or cued in by that really, I've teamed up with some colleagues and we created an AI audit framework that identifies AI assumptions and audits the system for them. We have since used this approach for personality assessment tools and are in the process of using it for motion capture technology and AI speech-to-text transcription software. When assumptions are violated in these audits, we can examine their epistemological roots. Where do these ideas come from that are sort of operationalized in the systems? And we can reveal that if they are not working, or we can speculate about why they are not working. That could be because they are eugenicist or pseudoscientific, or this could have other reasons. Now, as we consider scaling this approach, we can enlist communities of practice, like recruiters, who have a quite literally vested interest in AI that quote unquote works. So at the moment in Sloane Lab, we are putting together a public database of AI recruiting tools that includes for each tool a description of the assumptions, the type of AI that is used, NLP or regression or whatever it is, and the data that it processes. This too is designed to enable better AI procurement in the HR sector specifically. My last point is about AI governance as compliance versus AI governance in research and development. I'm almost done, I promise. We fought hard to make AI regulation a concern, but pushing it entirely into the compliance space runs the risk of reframing AI harms considerations entirely as a liability project, sort of atrophying the hard-earned ethics and social science muscles we are trying to build among our students and in some ways across industry. Just think about the responsible AI work that is happening in industry as well and has for many years. To address this, we can turn to a very useful sociological framework, social practice theory. It says that any social practice, cooking or designing and deploying AI, is made up of meanings, of competencies, and materials. Those link up to stabilize that practice. If we can find a way to engineer the meaning of the practice of AI research and development to encompass AI governance concerns, then we may see it enacted outside of compliance. In the past, this has happened. Just think about how routine safety testing became part of research and development in the automotive industry. Of course, this was prompted by new regulatory regimes, but these did change the meaning of that practice. And I think we have seen that in the AI space, that we are in this moment where we can perhaps replicate this. I think we're at a critical juncture. I think all of you have a lot to say, and I'm looking forward to discussing these more. Thank you for indulging the social scientists on the panel.
Thank you so much, Mona. And actually, I was wrong. We actually have plenty of time for questions. So we have until about 10:50. So I will actually invite people, as you're reacting to some of the content we've heard already, to ask some questions. And we will, as Alla gets ready. So are there any questions from the audience people want to ask? Oh, yeah, in the back.
Thank you.
Yeah, please wait for the mic. Just raise
Thank you
your hand.
so much for a wonderful panel. We have all heard the term responsible AI, but there's really not a useful definition that I've seen. I'm actually on several committees that talk about responsible AI, but I never see any action that is actually responsible. So I would love to hear what is your practical, actionable definition.
Yeah, anybody who wants to answer. I'll take a turn.
Okay, I can go first. I'm going to be extremely honest. I was never a fan of responsive AI for a number of reasons. The first one being that it sort of reinforces a hierarchy because it sort of it sort of acknowledges there's this one powerful actor and we just need to make sure they're responsible and then everything will go away. It's sort of almost anti-democratic if you think about it that way. Now, but if I think about it in terms that I just presented, social practice, meaning, and all these kinds of things, if we can co-opt, if you will, that frame and make it all about sort of almost stealth compliance or making compliance thinking part of how we do R&D, I think we have a window of opportunity here. But then we also have sort of waves and hypes of terms, right? We had AI ethics, then we had responsible AI, now we have AI safety, now we're gonna have AI leadership. So it depends. So I don't have a good answer, but I do think that there's an opportunity to solidify doing and thinking things like AI impact assessment that we can implement sort of now without having to put a label on it.
Yeah, Olivia.
There's a question back here first.
Oh, yeah, we're going to let the other panelists respond, and then, yes, we'll go around.
Oh, yeah, I can just do a quick note on that. I totally agree with you. I think, the word responsible has had various iterations over administrations and just over time. I think in the first Trump administration, it was trustworthy use of AI. Responsible came about at some point. The Biden executive order was titled Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy. But for me, I'm a very practical person. So the way I see it is just, measuring the benefits of AI, what benefit will it bring against the risks, and making informed decisions on whether those benefits sufficiently outweigh the risks, and risks can be legal, ethical, and whatnot. And so that's the way I see it, but I agree with you that the terms have been evolving probably too much.
We're actually going to hear from Alla. I'm glad we're getting the question started, and hopefully you'll be able to generate your questions, and we'll be able to have a robust discussion. But I want to have Alla speak before we have the full discussion. She's an expert in government procurement and currently a senior manager on the Amazon Web Services public policy team, where she leads U.S. federal public sector and U.S. regulated industry policy work. So we thought it'd be really terrific for her to say from the outside, as she's seeing these different directives come in and she's seeing the change in the administration, what practically does that mean for a company like Amazon, which implements AI in so many different areas? So she is shaping these policies associated with AI procurement and also government AI, IT adoption. She's an attorney who worked at the Internet Association previously and served in the government as the acting director of the Office of Acquisition of the GSA's Technology Transformation Services, as well as 18F. So again, knowing what it means to buy technology, GSA buys technology for a lot of the federal government. We're really grateful to be able to have her insights. So go ahead, Alla.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, folks. What I lack in slide design, I'll make up for in being pithy and giving an industry perspective. I assume someone will. Yeah, there we go. I mean, it's probably coming. Yeah, there we go. Oh, here we go. Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Alla Seiffert. I'm on the public policy team at Amazon Web Services, and I'm thrilled to be here to give an industry voice from someone on the ground. At Amazon Web Services, we're very proud to do work throughout the federal government and having, as a cloud service provider, providing cloud to the intelligence, defense, and civilian agencies across the United States. And in addition to working with state and local governments, universities, and the like, and in supporting the public sector, we have really seen the evolution and maturation of technology adoption to include machine learning, AI, and now Gen AI across public sector use cases. And so it's really actually really nice that Colleen had me go last, because I think I can sort of summarize a variety of topics that have been discussed so far in terms of how they're manifested in a very tactical way for a government vendor, and what sort of compliance means as you all think about the various legal frameworks and how they do or do not accomplish various goals. And I can give a bit of, as someone who is rather focused on Congress and the new administration, I can also opine a bit. Maybe we'll do that at Q&A about things I'm seeing on the ground as these policies are evolving. So first, the legislative environment associated with technology across public sector is rather finite, and I think I want to echo a theme from Olivia's points earlier about the various steps outlined in OMB guidance. Many of those steps in a lot of policies were incumbent on government agencies to execute, and that is because there is a lack of any legislative frameworks for agencies currently about things they have to do, except for when it comes to government IT security. There is a tremendous volume of past legislative action, a fair amount of policies, but also multiple pieces of legislation, to include ones that are updated every handful of years, really focused on what are the rules associated with the government deploying any technology. And they are primarily focused on security, with NIST serving as an underlying organization that creates the security baseline and the technical controls that are then implemented across government agencies. And so you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this dichotomy between sort of like governance procedures borne by agency officials and IT security procedures, which are sometimes borne by the vendor community, and the relative sort of the security infrastructure and the governance processes associated with deploying a technology in the public sector. They are robust. They've been around for many years. They're kind of they're being executed every day, though perhaps less so by DOJ right now, but historically have been there's a very robust set of rules that are being followed in order to deploy technology and a system or an updated system in public sector. As AI falls into that, for those of you thinking quite a bit about policy, or in case of some of my esteemed panelists making the policies, there is an interplay in between the existing technology deployment policies, which are primarily cybersecurity focused, and thinking about how they should and should not also include other mechanisms and other practices around responsible AI, or whatever we will be calling it in the Trump administration. So, to start, Competition and Contracting Act is sort of like the baseline that governs how government buys stuff, and it effectively says that the government needs to be competing things for contracts. And The only folks in the federal government that can go to jail for the work they do every day are procurement officials. They receive a warrant, and it is a sort of an anti-fraud, undue influence kind of statutory rule, which is that procurement officials are the ones who are able to take your taxpayer dollars and obligate them onto a contract. No one else in the government is allowed to do that. It is an inherently governmental function. It is not a function you can outsource. So it has to be a government official that obligates taxpayer money onto a contract. This is a very powerful moment. I think that's why you saw M2410 and the follow-on M2418 as OMB policies really think about, is that a moment of leverage that the government can use to think about how it interacts with the vendor community? But I'll talk a little bit about how the government and industry sort of shared responsibility model, if you will. It incorporates a variety of different aspects. So there's two other laws that are on the books that are relevant and important in this. They primarily cover cybersecurity, but I think as folks are thinking about AI governance writ large, they are relevant. And those are FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, and FITARA, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act. Those are different pieces of legislation that talk about the interplay between the CIO of an agency and procurement officials. And the interplay therein, again, I think is really important because, just real talk, Congress not passing a lot of laws, probably not having a lot of bipartisan consent or bipartisan consensus rather about AI policy, at least not this early in the 119th Congress. And ultimately what that means is the legislative hooks are probably going to be the ones that are already on the books. So agency governance on IT. So there's a warranted contracting official and then the CIO. And the idea is they are to make a decision together. That's what FITARA says, is a procurement official is not allowed to just buy IT, through a competition, what have you, without CIO involvement. That is the current mechanism. You'll notice that there is not an explicit statutory or other sort of mechanism for the role of the chief AI officer. And I will note, I wanted to note something that Mona mentioned that I wanted to emphasize. This administration is really thinking about the role of the chief AI officer and the chief information officer at federal agencies, because they understand the importance of this mechanism, and they understand the power associated with the U.S. federal government being the largest buyer of IT in the world. They do spend over $100 billion on technology annually. And this is a very powerful mechanism, which is why we recently saw a memorandum from the Office of Personnel Management asking agencies to reclassify their chief information officers from career to political appointees. And I also think, in light of something Mona said, that I wanted to mention that I do think we are going to see the chief AI officers at many agencies be fundamentally political appointees. And not detailees, not folks maybe on rotation from the PIF, not as other secondary duty as assigned by maybe a technology executive within an agency, but just straight up net new political appointments. Post-award contract management currently handled by the contracting officer's representative and a contracting official. And then an authority to operate is issued by a chief information officer. This is sort of like what FISMA is all about, is how does that work? And those are really important moments where the government wrestles with what information it needs from the vendor in order to deploy a solution. Like I said, most of these, actually all of these on this list, are fundamentally cybersecurity mechanisms, but I mention them because they're possibly the only ones that will exist, because there is a lack of bipartisan consensus on Capitol Hill to pass any other legislation. So when it comes to government AI procurement, how am I doing on time? Okay. Oh, great. Awesome. Something about AI is the vast majority of AI is developed in commercial industry. There are some pieces of the AI technology stack that may be inherent to, native to, or developed by the public sector itself. But by and large, at least currently, most solutions are developed by industry and therefore are and must be sort of purchased. we at AWS are huge proponents of commercial item acquisition. We believe that cloud is fundamentally a commercial technology and so should be purchased as such. The government sometimes likes to default to extremely complex acquisition procedures associated with buying like a weapon system or some sort of government-specific equipment, but ultimately AI is commercial, and I think that's important to mention, and incorporating sort of as many commercial terms and conditions as possible in that regard. And when it comes to procurement, I wanted to sort of disambiguate. I think we've talked a lot about AI procurement up until this point in a pretty broad brush, but the different parts of the tech stack can and do require a fundamentally different approach to how it is that government buys, who it is that buys, and who it is that deploys. And a lot of that has to do, echoing, I think, Mona and Olivia's themes earlier about talent. And the federal government itself does not have very much technical talent and oftentimes outsources that talent to professional services contractors. And fundamentally what that means is there'll be a team of technologists who will have a different colored badge but be performing functions that are really important to AI or technology governance, but will be employed by a Booz Allen Hamilton or a Deloitte or what have you. And so sometimes when we talk about procurement, I think it is really important to disambiguate who is doing the buying and who is doing the deploying and how is governance being done and is it actually being done by government personnel? Because I would actually posture to say the vast majority of the time, especially in technology and government, it is being handled by contractors, which is why the current memorandums on cutting consulting contracts, such as those that were released a couple of days ago by the General Services Administration, I think are going to be really interesting to watch in this space because in addition to perhaps changing the government's appetite about risk, they will fundamentally reduce the total capacity of the government to move through any sort of approvals. So, I did also want to mention that different approaches to procurement are necessary for different agency requirements. The use cases that Olivia shared that are in the public AI inventory, I think are really interesting. And for those of you that are in this space, really recommend checking those out. That's a really, the inventory is a great example of sort of government transparency. One that I talk about a lot is very boring and esoteric, but is nevertheless government use of AI, and that is the Veterans Health Administration was able to use an optical character recognition algorithm to digitize medical records that were handwritten from the Vietnam War and imported them into their electronic health record system to have a more complete picture of veteran records. That is pretty back office. It's not very like cool or exciting, but nevertheless, I think really important when it comes to sort of the fulsome use or thinking about the use of AI by government agencies. I want to disambiguate around how it is that the government buys because I think it is important for understanding the broader context, both of sort of where we're at and where we're going. And that is sometimes the government will say they want a solution, but the solution does not exist in industry, or maybe they need to customize an existing model or some other sort of system that may involve AI. And traditionally, the government will go out and they will ask for the outcome, and the outcome will be most likely produced by a system integrator, which is like CGI Federal or Booz Allen or SAIC. And then there'll be maybe an IT solution with a tremendous amount of labor associated with building that thing, borne by the system integrator. I bring up these examples, by the way, because I think when we talk about governance, and I think Olivia's timeline of sort of governance procedures outlined in M2410 is really instructive, but the thing I wanted to point out is it really varies who performs the governance action. And in sort of where does vendor responsibility live? Where does the deployer versus developer responsibility live? And in the government, because of the reliance on professional services contractors, it can really vary. And I think that's just that's an important nuance associated with sort of public sector technology. The vast majority of technical talent is contracted by most executive branch agencies. So sometimes we'll see the system integrators where they do the labor and perform many, perhaps, governance tasks plus the sort of the IT solution. Then there's buying commercial AI, and then there being a separate contract for software development. And so in that sense, perhaps the separate contract is actually performing governance functions. Or the government may buy COTS with no modifications, in which case the government may be on the hook and government employees may be doing their own governance. So what does this all mean? So we're certainly huge fans of encouraging the government to buy with commercial procedures whenever possible. I did want to note here, we've talked about, I think Mona in particular mentioned this in her discussion about the AI workforce, and Olivia too, and what does the current changes in administration mean? And Deirdre talked about it at length during the keynote. What does it mean for the potential decimation of the total volume of the AI workforce in government? And I think that is going to be a rather difficult thing for the government to come back from. Because if it is unable to keep that workforce, how can it perform the governance functions? But I did just want to give a plug that the AI workforce involves the acquisition workforce, and I do think they are one and the same, and it's a really key component. When it comes to sort of risk, I think the dichotomy of M2410 is perhaps painting with too broad of a brush, and perhaps use case specific governance procedures should be used. And then what are the government's requirements, and thinking about that. As the government thinks about using more AI than it is right now, which has certainly been, I think, the mandate, both from DOGE and other Trump administration things, thinking about resourcing both AI governance and IT security governance. And to the extent that I'm already over time, the Trump administration's focus on AI leadership, the executive order on removing barriers to American leadership in AI, we are going to see M2410 and M2418 revised, I think in the next 30 days. The focus on AI dominance, the chief AI officers moving from career to political, changing the U.S. digital service to the U.S. DOGE service, tremendous amounts of cuts over at the different GSA programs on this. And then I actually, while I was sitting here, was getting messages about possibly changes in the federal risk authorization and risk management, the FedRAMP program, which is sort of like an IT compliance program for cloud. And we're going to see some, I think, major changes there to make it easier for vendors to comply, and possibly moving away from NIST standards to potentially ISO or some other kind of security frameworks that would certainly speed things up, but would perhaps introduce some cybersecurity risks. So with that, happy to sit down and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have about 20 minutes for questions, so I'm going to just ask one first of a couple people on the panel, but please get your questions ready. Raise your hand so that the runner can come to you and bring you the microphone. But I wanted to ask a little bit about picking up where Olivia left off in terms of her suggestion around worker-centered, worker-impacted AI. You talked about the positive use case you thought of VA sort of being able to digitize a lot of records. So what do we do with that, given sort of where we are? If you identify, a lot of people who were manually looking at records won't be doing that anymore. Olivia, where do you see that sort of eventually heading?
Yeah, that's a good question, Colleen. So I think a couple things. I think I really appreciated the example that Alla held up. And so another, I think, suggestion for the MMO would be to hold up around like 5 to 10 lighthouse use cases of AI across the federal government. I think there's really great uses of AI. And I think if the Trump administration were to focus and, improve the innovation section of the MMO, figure out their priorities as the federal government, especially with reduced workforce, and say, these are the 10 things we want to hit in the next administration, and make sure that's publicly vetted and democratic and whatnot, I think that would be great, and I would love to see that. But at the same time, this also means that, ensuring federal worker protections are embedded into those uses of AI. And I think those are things like, for example, if AI is automating part or all of a federal worker's job, and I think we've seen this in various examples, having that worker not just be fully automated, have their job removed, but upskilling the worker, making sure they're involved in the development of AI, making sure they understand how AI is making decisions, because really that worker has the expert knowledge which is needed to train the AI system and needed to make it work. And I've seen it in various examples in private sector. And so I think that key to the innovation and unlocking those really big AI innovations is making sure that workers are brought along in the journey. That not only helps upskill the worker and workforce and LA workforce displacement concerns, but I think it'll also make the AI that the administration builds better.
Do we have a question yet? Okay,
Go ahead.
and please do raise your hand so that we can get around.
Great panel. We all know it's going to be a very weird 2 and 4 years in DC with the gridlock and the political turmoil. I'm curious, a couple of panelists mentioned it's hard to get to consensus where it's truly bipartisan and kind of seems like a no-brainer. I'm curious what policies, whether it's on the safety side of sea burn risk and electrical grids, or on the worker productivity side or more efficient government side, where you can say, hey, here's a no-brainer that both sides should be able to get behind, and it's a really obvious thing that should be done.
Sorelle? So I guess I would start by lifting up what Deirdre also mentioned in her keynote, which is that a whole bunch of the AI policies that we were implementing under the Biden-Harris administration were actually started under the first Trump administration, right? So the first Trump administration, there was an executive order on AI that also included a whole bunch of principles, right? It included non-discrimination as one of the principles, also, a bunch of sort of basic safety, efficacy, robustness, and so on. And the AI use case inventory, which is the sort of transparency mechanism that's used to demonstrate compliance with M2410, was also started in one of the Trump executive orders, right? So I guess I want to emphasize that to say, there has historically been an existing bipartisan consensus around doing this type of work, right? Around making sure that AI works and works for everyone. And so I at least don't think that that should stop. I recognize that that may not be the political landscape. I guess I would also say, so before becoming a professor, I was a software engineer at Google. And I would also say from that vantage point, and emphasizing what Olivia also said during her talk, right? A lot of these practices in these AI guidance memos are really just standard best practice in industry. You should test your system before you release it. Yes, I hope so, right? You really should. You should continue to test your system to make sure it keeps working. Yes, of course you should, right? And so I guess I would hope that there would continue to be consensus around common sense ideas like that.
I'll give a tactical political answer, and I think those are going to be defense and intelligence uses of AI. That is a smaller set of committees. They have more focused jurisdiction, and there's also every single year an intelligence authorization and defense authorization bill that passes Congress every single year. And so when you think about things that will move, there are very few bipartisan vehicles that do that. So I think those are tactical. I think this was more of a strategic answer, but tactically, I think those communities are ones where they both can reach a decision and then have a mechanism for passing that decision through both chambers, which I think is important.
Yeah, I'll just agree with that and say, to echo Sorelle's point, the Biden administration did not rescind any of Trump's AI executive orders or AI policies. That was obviously changed in January, where Trump rescinded the AI executive order in his first week. So we are seeing a changing landscape. I think the things that'll stay common or stay bipartisan, but this is, again, my speculation, are things like chip export controls. The Biden administration, for national security reasons, announced a lot of those at the end of December. Also released an AI executive order on improving or enabling the building of AI data centers across the country to promote innovation while protecting the environment. I think that the Trump administration will continue to lean into those things. I hope the Trump administration continues to lean into the National AI Research Resource, which enables compute resources for not just the largest AI companies. It's really expensive to build and train a model, but also for more independent research organizations. That really helps stimulate the AI economy and make sure we have a flourishing competitive environment.
Thank you for all of these wonderful presentations. I have a question for Olivia Zhu. I'm very impressed by the term minimum risk management practice, but I think it's very abstract to define the minimum. So is there any very concrete criteria for it or quantitative measures? And does the term minimum also an indication that the present office don't want the government to intervene in the industry too much?
Yeah, I think I'll say a few things about that. I think the word minimum really means that these aren't exhaustive. I think like Sorelle mentioned, the administration before was really emphasizing public participation. The MMO and those practices were influenced by a lot of input from the public, including private sector companies, including technologists. And so the idea was to boil down a consensus of what are the really basic bare bones things that need to happen across all of these. There are additional risk management practices that should be implemented across AI use cases. And the decision was to leave that up to the federal agencies to say, hey, here's your minimum bar, things that the Office of Management Budget will check for. But there are things that you should be doing additionally, and that's up to your technical discretion. That's at the discretion of people at your agency. You should be thinking about that. But these are, the very baseline of where we need the federal government to be across all agencies.
I have two questions. One for Mona, actually. You were sort of talking about audit washing and something that your conversation or hello? Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, okay. Something that your example of Pymetrics reminded me of was that the ACLU, like a couple months ago, had filed a complaint of Pymetrics discrimination against job applicants of disabilities for similar reasons of what you mentioned, where even if according to race or gender it passes sort of these EEOC guidelines, there's other dimensions of the technology. And I was kind of curious about your thoughts in general of just civil society participating in shaping procurement decisions, because something that was interesting about their complaint was also the fact that Pymetrics is used by various agencies and used by various government actors. And so I'm kind of curious about just your thoughts in terms of civil society's participation in shaping procurement decisions. And then I had another question for Alla around just the dimensions between vendors, especially cloud vendors, when it comes to procurement. So my understanding is that actually the default cloud service in a lot of government agencies is Azure. And I'm curious about how at AWS you guys interact with that, and especially because a lot of these, let's say large language models are delivered through cloud services. And so I'm kind of curious about the competitive landscape and how viable it is to shape that, even as a competing company in that space.
Okay, first Mona.
Hi, Deb. It's great to see you. As I said, old friends. Okay, so I think this is a great point. I think revealing audit washing is the civil society concern for sure. I cannot help but think about how we could actually go about that. And just from my years of research in this space, both auditing and also engaging civil society and stakeholders, I think there is need and value to empower or ask for professional associations to step in. I'm thinking, just in the world of recruiting, we have very, very large professional associations who already have sort of lobbyists in DC who need to increase their AI literacy because these kinds of products don't actually serve their constituents. That's not going to give you good recruiting, these kinds of tools. That's just a fact. So I think there's a little bit more of a bigger demand we can actually put on these specifically, but I also think we can take that as a cue to organize in our own communities. So when I think of, the Student Technology Council project is one of those. How can we actually organize in communities that have sort of a shared interest to actually get actively involved in these kinds of decisions? And if you think about it in abstract ways, that could be a neat thing because there is an absence of this literacy or just a lack of time and resources in procurement offices, right? So if we can actually socially engineer efficient and accountable processes for participation in procurement, then we can make procurement a lot smarter. And I think that's just not been taken seriously enough.
And I can answer the question about sort of cloud competition in public sector. So the different companies offer different services at different layers of the tech stack. So at the infrastructure as a service layer, I would say AWS, GCP, Microsoft Azure, as well as Oracle Cloud Infrastructure are all big players at the infrastructure as a service layer. I think as you move up the tech stack, different companies certainly provide different services, some of which have AI. I'm thinking about in particular sort of Google Workspaces, but then also Microsoft Office 365 as SaaS vendors that very much compete against one another at the SaaS level of the tech stack in a place where we at AWS do not. When it comes to access to models, many entities, so we at AWS are very proud of a service called Bedrock that allows, that provides API access to a variety of different Gen AI models that are able to be consumed on through an API and sort of build on a consumption basis through a variety of different vendors, open source, quasi-open, like open weight models like Llama, as well as proprietary models like Anthropic's Claude, and all the other hyperscale CSPs offer something similar. So in that sense, from a government access perspective, I would not say that there's like necessarily somebody running away with it. I mentioned this program FedRAMP during my remarks, but for those of you interested, before they take it down, you can Google this thing called FedRAMP Marketplace, and you can see there are hundreds and hundreds of SaaS solutions that are already approved, many of which already use AI. Not all of them use Gen AI, but the market for this is rather robust in terms of approved solutions that the government's already vetted for cybersecurity that can be deployed at agencies.
Great.
Hi. I'm curious about this idea of opting out, especially when it comes to rights impacting AI. Specifically, I could think of an example like using it for cheating detection in a test-taking environment, where there might be a strong incentive to opt out. Or employing this kind of technology, say, in the workplace for promotion purposes, where there might be a strong incentive not to opt out. So I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are for the limitations of this kind of policy, and also ways that we could maybe support people who do want to opt out.
Okay, maybe I'll start, and then I don't know if Olivia wants to pick up. But I guess I would say, like, within the AI Bill of Rights, the sort of principle that we included related to that is human alternatives consideration and fallback. And the idea there is not that there's sort of like a one-size-fits-all solution, like you should be able to opt out of any AI ever for any reason, right? But rather that you should recognize that the way that these systems are built assumes that they will fail some percent of the time for some percent of people, right? Like, all we can ever do with an AI system is evaluate it statistically. If it has, say, like a 98% accuracy rate, we're like, hey, that sounds great. We are acknowledging then that it fails 2% of the time, right? And so the question is, in these like rights impacting scenarios, what are you going to do that 2% of the time, right? To make sure that you are actually covering everyone. And so, in some of those cases, right, it's going to be appropriate to allow people to opt out because perhaps, right, they have a disability, they actually like can't interact with the system. It's like very obvious to them that it's not going to work for them, right? You should give them that mechanism to opt out. In other cases, it's going to be more appropriate to give them some sort of mechanism for appeal, right? Somebody on the other end of the phone line who you can call and be like, why did you cut off my benefits? I should still get them. And so, I guess I see it as sort of an ecosystem, but recognizing that like humans are part of that overall AI system and will continue to have to be.
Yeah, and I do want to say that the MMO and a lot of these practices were influenced by the thought leadership of many people in this room, including Sorelle, Nick, and Deirdre. So a lot of this thinking was really what informed that. But specifically what the MMO does is, in the opt-out provision, I think the slide is definitely oversimplified to like the 100th degree. There is a where practicable, and I do believe that the MMO actually includes a example of like where opt-out might not be practicable. Like for example, in detecting fraud in financial transactions. Can't opt out of that because the people who opt out of that are probably the people committing fraud. However, like Sorelle mentioned, there are the opportunities for then dispute by the individual, and so it's up to the agency and the chief AI officer to interpret that where practicable, and then to determine which of those provisions to apply in rights impacting cases.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left and a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask the questioners to go, and then we'll do a lightning round at the end. So Paul first.
It's been a great panel. It's also just weird that we're like in the middle of processing trauma, and half of what you're saying we could have said 3 months ago, and half of what you're saying. And so I don't want to ask, right, why Doge was so quickly able to take over USDS. But what I want to know is there a break we could have built into USDS, and I know, Alla, you have experience with 18F, that would have at least made it harder, added some friction, or is that just like blaming the victim at this point?
I'll let her talk and while we go to the next speaker.
Yeah, I'll just quickly go. I mean, I think the answer is Congress. I think the answer is Article 1. Like, these are folks that could have exercised some amount of oversight over the executive branch, and sometimes do. Think about all the, healthcare.gov, like think about other IT things that have happened over the last several decades. Congress can and has been engaged and is actively choosing to sit this one out.
Next question, and please raise your hand if you have a question so we can make sure we get as many.
Thanks. We talked a lot about almost companies and organizations that use AI but things go wrong, but there's also a subset of AI challenges where there's actually malicious use from, say, criminal enterprises and so on. And I think there can be a lot more support over this, but I'm wondering what the fate of this is, particularly because there was some movement on that, I think, in an early Trump executive order around malicious cyber capabilities that was then built on in the Biden EO, but then that was rescinded and the rulemaking is unclear. So I'm not sure where that goes, but that's a question around infrastructure as a service and the role of cloud providers in that, and the role of cloud providers in stopping this kind of thing or being addressed, which I think was what that was almost trying to get at before. And so I'm wondering what the fate of that is, and if broader criminal kind of questions in governance that we're not talking about as much. Thanks.
I'm not totally sure I have an answer. I don't know if other folks on the panel do.
Me neither, but I'm sure, Michael, this is a great paper in the making.
Okay, next question.
Hi, thanks for this great panel. I wanted to pick up on the allusion to chip-level regulation. So kind of thinking about federal governance actions sort of deeper in the stack, do you think there's going to be more continuity between the Biden and the Trump administration on this layer, things like the CHIPS Act or diffusion rules? Do you think those will hold? Thank you.
My personal thought is the diffusion rule may hold. I think it's a draft right now from the Department of Commerce, so I think they'll definitely update it based on feedback. I don't know. I know that, I think someone mentioned earlier that the NIST CHIPS office is being potentially, gutted right now, so I'm not as sure if that will hold. Those are my personal opinions.
Alla, thank you. You had mentioned at the end that you thought that the revisions to the memos will probably make it easier for vendors to comply, and that might lead to some cybersecurity risks. I just wanted to know if you could elaborate on that a bit for me.
Sure. No, I think she said all that. Yeah. These are actually separate things. The revisions to the memo will make it easier for agencies to buy AI. I think they will simplify many of the compliance processes outlined in M2418. Then separately, I think the 50% staff cuts over at the FedRAMP program, which is sort of like the security authorization clearinghouse for cloud-based technology, and the desire for GSA leadership to make that process go faster will incorporate non-NIST, probably, maybe, will incorporate non-NIST-based cybersecurity frameworks, which will both increase the total pool of available vendors, but possibly not have the same sort of like auditing requirements that are currently associated with that program.
Great, Stephanie gets the last question.
Responsibility. I was curious if, even though there's a massive gutting of talent, technical talent happening right now on the federal level, if you think that with the new focus on AI leadership, there might be a weird reverse opportunity to actually have an influx of new tech talent, or do you think that it's more likely that that would end up being outsourced? Because it does seem to me stronger tech foundations within the federal government would be a huge benefit for AI safety overall.
I can maybe quickly chime in here. I think we need to look at this not just at the phenomenon in isolation. I think what we're really seeing is a erosion of institutions and infrastructures. And I think, as Alla said earlier, it's going to be incredibly to rebuild those. I mean, we're feeling that in higher education already, and so it's going to be, I don't think even if there was this opportunity, which I agree is a really valid and attractive thought, it would be really hard to actually act on that across the board, because we're all organizations, institutions are in some way connected to the government. And so I think that's the bigger picture, is the basis is sort of eroding, if that makes sense.
If I could jump in on that really quickly.
We're out of time, but we're welcome to come and talk to the panelists. So thank you to all of you, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. See y'all back.